Out of the three PvZ shooters, Garden Warfare 1 is the game that has had the art style that has stood up the longest, with fans saying it is the best of the three games. Today we're going to look into how this art style evolved from what it was in concept art all the way to what we have now. So to begin with, we've got to go all the way back to 2012, around the time that EA would have bought PopCap. At this point, they would have been thinking of different ways they could evolve the franchise and also promote the new PvZ 2 game that would have been releasing. By this point, EA would have had multiple Battlefield games under their belt and also have developed the Frostbite engine. After bouncing around different ideas on what game they could develop, they finally settled on making a shooter game. Since this would have been developed in Frostbite, it means the game will have to be 3D. So there was a difficulty the developers had in translating all the 2D designs from PvZ 1 and 2 into these 3D environments. At this point in the gaming industry, it was very popular that people would be playing different shooter games, ones that are a bit more realistic and simulate actual gunplay. So at this time, PopCap wanted to try and make sure that their game fit in with all of the other ones. We can see by some early concept art for the game that they wanted to take it in a very realistic direction, opting to make characters like the pea shooter more humanoid to fit in with that. They would draft up a bunch of different concept art, specifically for stuff like the pea shooter, the chomper, and the brown coat. It was quite clear though that we're losing the charm of the original game. You can see here there's even a note by one of the developers saying they're losing the classic look. They continue messing around with different potential designs for the characters, also coming up with different ideas for the classes as well, specifically the zombies, before they'd finally settle on getting somewhat close to what we have now. After they'd finally got the style they wanted to go with, they now needed to know what characters they wanted to be in the game. They came up with a bunch of different concepts for different classes before they settled on the SWAT zombie, the All-Star, the Gravedigger, and the Engineer. Now with all the concept art made, it was time to make some proper 3D models for these characters. We don't know which model was designed first, but looking at the design of this SWAT zombie here, it makes me think this was probably the first one they did. Now this model is completely lost, but we do have the textures since they were left over in Garden Warfare 2. We can see what the skin and also the costume texture would look like. At this point in time, a lot of the details on the character was done specifically on the model and not the textures, but this could also just be because it's an early design. They also made an early version of Brown Coat as well. This version's using the same model as the foot soldier for the head. They would later update the head to be a unique one that's used in Garden Warfare 1 and was updated for the second game, and they'd use this model to make multiple test renders of the brown coats and the different variants of him. These renders would be repurposed later on for the different icons when you go to spawn a zombie. They would go on to make a design for the Gravedigger, the Engineer, the All-Star, and a new one for the SWAT zombie as well. They'd also make two imps as well that are for both SWAT zombie and All-Star. They'd both be able to spawn these guys in. If you look at the two zombie classes that have their current models, you can see they all use different textures as well. Now Engineers is completely lost to my knowledge, but we actually have this design of All-Star in Garden Warfare 2. Since it was used as a texture for one of the display cases in Z-Tech Factory, one of the parts of the texture has been replaced with All-Star's gun, but here you can see what All-Star's old design would look like in the current day version of the game. The plants also got a bunch of different texture changes and model changes throughout development. First is this image of the cactus. Personally, I think this more fits in line with BFN's art style over Garden Warfare 1, so you can kinda get why this was scrapped. There's also multiple versions of the pea shooter with different textures. He's also got a different version of the Gatling as well. The rest of the plants didn't really receive many changes outside of textures, so I'll show you what they look like on screen now. There is one in this image that is a bit different though, and that is Laserbeam. At this point in time, Far Future would have been in development for PvZ 2, which means that they had to go off concept art to make Laserbeam, so I'll show you on screen now what the concept art looked like. All the characters I've mentioned here would have been put into the game engine now, with SWAT Zombie and Gravedigger being the classes that they've gone with, and at this point they start developing multiple different concept arts for maps in the game. There's concept art for all of the Gardens and Graveyards maps, with stuff like Driftwood Shores, Walnut Hills and Main Street having the most of them, and it gives us a good look at what they envision the game to be like with these old classes. With all of that covered now, let's move on to the stuff in the game. At this point in time, they would have implemented all the characters I mentioned earlier into the main game, and would also have some basic weapons for each of them. To my knowledge, a lot of the characters used placeholder weapons from Battlefield for the moment, but everything was somewhat functional. They quickly realised that both Gravedigger and SWAT Zombie wasn't going to work in the art style, so they ended up changing them. They wanted to move away from the more realistic nature of SWAT Zombie to a more cartoonish character like the Foot Soldier is now, and that also extends to the Gravedigger as well, who used to have a triple barrel shotgun but got swapped out for a goo blaster. So they got a bunch of concept art for Scientist and the Foot Soldier as well, and they went on to make both of the characters' models. Both characters are nearly identical to what we have now, but Soldier has his goggles on his helmet and the Scientist doesn't have his larger eyes. All the footage here comes from the dev diaries that PopCat posted on the YouTube channel. This is a very old version of Garden Warfare 1 that I'd assume was from very early 2013. It uses a lot of the old textures that I talked about earlier. It's also got a very different looking Walnut Hills as well, showing that older art style. The first thing I want to cover from this is the dummy shield. It's clearly a placeholder, but it is using part of the engineer's turret at the bottom. This isn't the only unused shield design, however. There's concept art for a different version of the shield decoy, and this was actually used in Garden Warfare 2 for one of the All-Star displays. I'll show you on screen what it looks like now. Like I mentioned earlier, the lighting in this map is very different to what we have in the current day version of Garden Warfare. You can see here it's a lot more white and a lot more dull. You can also see the UI is a little bit different too. Originally they were going to make it so you could see what ammo you've got in the interface, but ended up getting rid of it. In one of the other videos they posted on their channel, you can see an early version of the booth as well. The zombie side wasn't very different, but on the plant side you can see the lighting was very similar to Walnut Hills and also had a tree in it for some reason. So you can see here how much time and effort went into perfecting the art style of Garden Warfare 1. You can see all the different concepts they went through, all the different designs for the characters, and all the different lighting options they went with as well. The amount of things they changed during development of this game just shows how passionate they were about getting the game to look the best it can possibly be. And even over 10 years later, I think the graphics to this game still hold up and the art style does as well. But I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to leave a like, maybe subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you all in the next one.